Hello, my name is Julia Streets and welcome to the podcast series Streets Talks To. And in each episode, I interview leaders from some of the most influential firms, bodies and initiatives in the financial services industry. On each episode, we explore what's at the very forefront of innovation and change. We think about the challenges facing clients and also the industry at large. And we uncover the opportunities that exist both today and as we look ahead, particularly as we all navigate these extraordinary times. We really hope you enjoy this series, which you can find on all good podcast channels, and all the episodes are listed on our website, streetsconsulting.com. You can find these episodes using the hashtag StreetsTalksTo, and thank you for listening. And welcome to Streets Talks to SETL. SETL is a London-based technology provider with a proven track record in delivering distributed ledger technology, or DLT, for financial markets, asset management and payments. SETL's proprietary technology is designed specifically for regulated, high-performance, low-latency applications, and its technology powers regulated financial market infrastructures that are both active and also operational. And when I talk about these, think about central securities depositories such as ID2S and fund distribution platforms such as ISNES. Most recently, SETL has successfully completed the world's first central bank digital currency live funds transaction in collaboration with the Banque de France using the SETL blockchain. So today I'm delighted to be joined by two guests, Philippe Morel, CEO, and Marjan Delatinne, Head of Payments. Let me tell you a bit about each of them. Philippe Morel is the CEO of SETL, and prior to joining, he was a worldwide leader for capital markets, as well as the EMEA leader for a private equity and principal investor practice at a top-tier strategic consulting firm. He has more than 25 years of experience in financial services right the way across Europe, including advising corporates and financial institutions on strategies, organisation and change management. Philippe, it's wonderful you could join us. Thanks for being on the show today.
Julia, always a pleasure to talk to you.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I'm delighted that today you're joined by Marjan Delatinne, who is the head of payments at SETL. She has overall responsibility for growing its payments business alongside the market infrastructure and asset management offerings. Now, she most recently joined, having served as global head of banking at Ripple, and has served in various senior business development roles at Swift, where she was responsible for the commercialization of large-scale projects, both in securities and in the world of payments. Think particularly Target2 Securities and Swift GPI. So Marjan, wonderful you could be with us. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here today, and thanks for having me, Julia.
It's a pleasure. I can't wait to get into the discussion. And what we always start with is, rather than talk about SETL, and I hope I've done you proud in the way I've described the business, but actually I'm more interested in thinking about what is it your clients are thinking about? What is it that's particularly keeping your clients awake at night? So Philippe, can I come to you first of all? Love to hear your thoughts about what clients are talking to you about.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Well, I would say obviously we're in the midst of a pandemic, and this combined with Brexit keeps a lot of our clients very aware of their environment. But specifically to our area of concern, which is technology, I would say after so many years of having to adjust to regulation, our clients are now thinking of making a move and using the new technologies available and really change their business models. Yeah, they know specifically to a blockchain that they have a platform which will allow them to make their transactions faster, more efficient at a lower cost. Yet the level of investment required can be significant. And so I think a number of them are asking themselves, is this the right time to make the big move in the unknown and start changing infrastructures which have been in place for the last 30 years. Yeah. So I think this point is really, I would say, top of the agenda of a number of CIOs, CTO, and CEOs of our clients.
And Marjan, you're talking to clients in the payments world in particular as well. Love to hear your thoughts. I mean, does that chime? Are they talking about digital transformation, or are they talking particularly about payments change?
So coming back to payments, because this is a very noisy world, right? Almost every day you have something new. You have a regulation actually in specific markets pushing for change and bringing competition in terms of solution to the customers. But at the same time, the underlying factor of this transformation is technology, right? And I think throughout this noisy world, we still haven't been able to deliver to the promise of cutting costs and bringing a real experience. And I think that that's where a blockchain or DLT has been introduced since few years, but we haven't yet managed to deliver the promise fully. I think what we see with COVID and the pace of transformation that is really accelerating is giving a new opportunity, a new, I would say, momentum to DLT.
And if we think about, there's been an enormous amount of hype around DLT. We have to admit that as well. I'd really love to get your thoughts in terms of where do you see people really doing business? Where is there real change? Philippe, love your thoughts on that.
No, you're absolutely right, Julia. I would say there's been a lot of hype about blockchain. And for several years now, only a few proof of concepts, or actually quite a lot of proof of concept have been delivered, yeah? And so more and more clients or in general industry commenters are asking, is this technology just about delivering proof of concepts? Yeah. But I think for probably the last 6 months, we've seen a real acceleration in the number of projects coming live. And you were kind enough to mention what we've done with the French Central Bank and what we've done actually 18 months ago with ISS and ID2S. But I would say in the securitized loan area, in the equity issuance, in the bond issuance, in bond trading, I would say we see more and more of projects coming live. And as we see more of those projects coming live, I would say the industry in general realizes that this technology can really change the way that back offices and front offices alike work in terms of cost, in terms of speed, in terms of impact. And as those projects come alive, I would say that the impact on the overall industry landscape is changing. And you can see banks who are actually taking a lead in this area versus banks who aren't. And it's probably too early to say, but my bet is in 18 months' time, you will start seeing impact on the bank's results. Those who are really making the effort to make the investment, understand the technology, understand its impact on their business model, and those who prefer to take more of a laid-back approach. And there'll be winners and losers. And obviously our point is winners will be those who embrace this technology with energy and really make the most of it.
Wonderful. So Marjan, Philippe was just saying about those who can really take a lead here. But there are some very specific areas that are changing very fast as well. And I know in the world of payments, there are some very keen areas you're paying attention to right now. I'd love to hear your insights into that.
So I think I would like to demystify why transformation and why transformation in payments. And I think the root cause goes back to the experience that we have with internet. Internet has shifted completely our life in terms of communication, in terms of entertaining ourselves, and in terms of even a daily life. And what COVID's actually reminded us is that probably the way that the financial industry is working is not fully yet catered to cope with this world of internet. And I think that's the, let's say, tipping point that we are facing with payments. Even though that you have lots of fintechs that are proposing new experience and new solutions, but the back end, which is today handled by the banking institutions, is not necessarily shifted completely. It's still based on legacy, very costly, and fintech doesn't like really necessarily to take up a back end. They like the front end. They manage the front end. They bring you experience. They use open banking. But at the end, who is the real actor in the financial industry today is still banks, because the accounts are still held with the banks. So I think this is where we have this tipping point of how we can change and transform the payments into the digital world. And coming back to what Philippe said in terms of who are the fast driver, who are the challengers. I think a few years back, we had fintechs trying to disrupt. What we see today that some of the large banks as well getting not into the disruption, because payments is a regulated world. You cannot disrupt it. You have to build an internet of value based on regulation. I think that's the path that we see today in the payment space.
And Philippe, just building on what Marjan was saying there, when you think about the fact that this is a very regulated world, but yet blockchain itself isn't necessarily regulated. But then in the middle, there's a whole discussion about central bank digital currencies. And I mentioned in my opening remarks that you've been running the tests with the Banque de France as well. I'd love to get your thoughts about why it's important that central banks are involved in the discussion, what that actually means for the market as a whole, and therefore your role within that.
I would say blockchain has a bit of a sulfurous reputation. A lot of people associate blockchain with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. There's much more to blockchain than just cryptocurrencies. And I think the fact that central banks are now stepping into this space shows that they are taking the technology seriously. They understand the impact. They understand that with blockchain, they can actually get rid of a commodity which has been in the world for the last 20 years or 40 centuries, which is cash. With COVID, people have started to realize that cash is actually not as useful as it used to be. And I would say individuals are moving away from using cash. Now, central banks are stepping in and trying to substitute, I would say, physical cash with digital cash. That's what CBDC is all about. Yeah. Now, that's just the first layer. The second layer behind that is central banks are sending a message, which is using blockchain as a regulated way of distributing cash or securities is becoming acceptable. So the technology underlying it can actually be a change agent for what Marjan was describing earlier, i.e. the large commercial banks in the world who are still owning a large part of the back-end transactions and which is still running on very obsolete technology. And so I think the message central banks are sending is it's not just cash that can be digitized, it's also any kind of underlying assets which are already, I would say, on stock exchanges like equity or bonds, but also real assets like real estate, etc. And so I think it's a really important message, which is well received, I would say, by the financial community as a whole, and for which we will see significant impacts in the coming years.
And I wonder if I can move the discussion on just a slight shift, if I may, which is to take this on to the conversation around tokenisation. And we talk about tokenisation quite often in the securitisation of tokens and digital currencies, et cetera, But I wonder whether we could think about the role of tokens in the world of payments. And Marjan, just picking up on your comment there about, the internet of value, thinking about some of the processing, some of the back office function as well. Mind naturally goes to things like digital identity, which is a common challenge that people are trying to tackle right now. And I know that's something you've been looking at. Do share your thoughts.
Yes, indeed. I think it's a very good question, Julia, in terms of, when we are talking about the payments today and in a regulated market, everything goes back to the accounts. An account means who you are, right? When you're talking about token, and as was mentioned by Philippe, token could be any kind of asset. So payments, securities, whatever, a painting. So whatever that you can digitize and represent a value is a store of value, right? So when you are moving from a world, and we see that through CBDC, and if CBDC will use DLC, that we see this is a trend because of all the experimentation that we see in the market. If they are using DLC, you are moving from an account-based model, which is heavily actually dominated in the payment securities world, to a token world, where token is a representation of the digital signature based on an immutable ledger, right? So this, I would say, is not a small shift in terms of change, because it's no longer your identity, but is immutability of digital signature in a ledger. That means that the trust that it is the most important element in the finance now becomes true through this immutability. So I think, therefore, when you look at the way that today we manage identity, well, of course, it has improved a lot. You don't go to the branches to show your passport. You do that in 3 to 5 minutes, a kind of high level, let's say, verification, but still is very much far from the world that the money and assets are fully digital. So I think, therefore, our approach, in addition to the tokenization, which is the essential part of the real-time settlement and finality, is to build the overlay services that enables actually a real experience. And I think digital identity, and I'm sure that this is a very common trend in the market, is the most essential part. And I think using DLT with the immutability and all the trust elements that you have in DLT makes much more sense on the top of existing solutions that are still based on physical certificates that you show, you take a picture. So, this is very transformational. But if you get to a full digital onboarding or with the capacity that goes with it, digital identity is very important. And okay, so we have launched a solution, Verified, is an open source digital identity platform, open to all the providers out there that are looking at implementing or integrating digital identity to payments. Obviously, it's a big step for us in terms of open sourcing our solutions. This is probably not the really first one, I would say. We have these habits and experience of building future-proven infrastructure and put at the disposal of the industry in terms of the usage and continuity.
It's going to be very interesting to continue this discussion about digital identity, and it's wonderful to see about the product, and I encourage listeners to go and check it out, because I think this is going to be great demand, certainly from early conversations that I've been having as well. But I wonder if we could just have a moment of caution, because I think in our appetite to talk about innovation, the pace of change, digital transformation, thinking about the world of payments and some of the innovation there, I worry that there are some things that we have slightly set aside, particularly in the context of, COVID has reframed how we work. We're thinking about Brexit and some of these big drivers as well. Can I just ask you both if there are areas that you think may have been put on the back burner or that we are at risk of overlooking? Marjan, can I stay with you first of all? What are we at risk of overlooking?
I think we shouldn't overlook the complexity of building a digital transformation strategy and implementing a digital strategy in a big organization. This is very complex, and especially if you want to move legacies towards new world. Some of the banks, the way that they handle that, they don't even touch the legacies and they open new banks, right? But we see that it doesn't work neither, because somehow the heritage of a bank is lying with the legacy. So I think what we realize is a lot around handholding and helping banks to build this strategy with the right partner. And that's where I personally spend a lot of time in terms of helping my clients to understand what is the value that this brings and what can be reused as a utility to somehow bring profitability to multiple business lines. Because this is about a new infrastructure that will somehow be connected to multiple business lines of the banks. And I think that's very important, and that's the time we spend.
And certainly as people are considering how to do that, you need to have somebody who by your side who not only understands the big picture, has the experience, but also understands the new innovations that are happening as well. That's a really, really salient moment, pause for thought, if you like. And Philippe, can I ask you the same question? What are we at risk of overlooking?
Well, I would absolutely second what Marjan just said. The technology works. DLT works. It's been proven for the last 3 or 5 years. So that's not in question anymore. The question is more what for, and how do we design solutions which work, which are implemented in an environment where our clients essentially get their money worth. And so having a team able not only to understand the technology, but is also able to understand the environment in which securities, cash, settlement, custody are all aligned in a way which is working properly, I think is really where the difference is. So the good news is DLT cannot be challenged anymore, because there's been so many proofs at SETL elsewhere that it is a technology which works and is here to stay. But again, taking Marjan's example earlier, going back to 2000, when internet was just a starting thing and a bit of a hype, we see that it has taken 20 years or 15 years for it to have the impact it has and really change our life. Now, I think what blockchain is doing is exactly the same thing on our clients' back office, back end, and also creating new opportunities new business models. It is true that the banks are absolutely here to stay, but at the same time, blockchain allows to decentralize finance a number of instruments and interactions which so far were in the hands of only a few players. Yeah. And I would say this decentralized finance is opening new business models, new way of working, and we're just at the beginning of seeing this their impact.
And I can't help to wonder, we're heading into arguably quite tough economic times, and the fight for budget. Here we are in the summer of 2021. Budget season comes around faster every year. So the longer my career goes on, the cycle goes around faster. But there is this constant pressure on how do you unlock the internal resources on your client side when you have to run the bank as well as, and I say the bank, financial institution, as well as change the bank. And I hear these stories about that pot of budget is just getting smaller and smaller. I'd love your thoughts on what advice do you give clients when they're making the call for that innovation pot, if you like. Philippe, can I address that to you?
Well, this debate clearly started in 2008 with the first big financial crisis of the century. And I would say a lot has been learned since then. We can certainly see now the difference between a number of our clients who have mastered this change the bank versus run the bank dilemma and have managed to set aside a sufficient pot of money to actually manage to start changing their institutions. And I would say it's only recent, maybe for the last 2-3 years, probably delayed by a few years because of COVID, but still it is going to be there, where a number of institutions, not necessarily the largest, but the more agile and the more, I would say, innovative, have managed to set aside a sufficient amount of money to actually use what the new technologies have to offer and not just scrap the surface and pretend they are doing some investment and pretend they're doing some stuff where in reality they are not doing much. And so what strikes me is, and unfortunately I can't quote names, but I have names in mind, is the difference between those leaders and the followers. And my bet is, as usual, if we fast forward ourselves in 10 or 15 years, we will see those leaders continuing to gain market share in the financial industry, where there's an endless trend of concentration, as we've seen, I would say, for quite some time now. And the differences are going to become more obvious because what technology is doing, it is enabling those innovative companies, innovative financial institutions to actually grasp all what technology is actually allowing them to do. And that is absolutely phenomenal and fantastic.
And of course, the greatest drivers of change in this industry are always found in the conversation about compliance and regulation. And we've talked a little bit about the regulation of the industry. We talked a little bit about blockchain and its contribution and how the central banks are paying attention to this as well. I'm going to ask you a slightly odd question, if I may, which is I'd love to know, when you look at the regulatory landscape, do you have a particularly favourite piece of regulation you're paying attention to right now? Marjan, I'm going to come to you first of all. What's your favourite piece of regulation?
I would call it really regulation, but I will call it as, I think this transformation, we are all in the same boat, right? And we see that this is not only with this commercial sector or private sector. We see as well the reflections today that the central banks and the oversight is doing around how you want to build a regulated market around this new technology, right? I think, and that is completely different than what we faced before. So I would really say that for DLT, and if the choice is going to DLT for CBDC, I think it's the best news. Because it will make this technology more scalable, it make that mainstream, and it will finally help to bring the promise to both let's say the business side and the retail side.
Wonderful. And Philippe, it's a similar question to you, really, as you look at the landscape. And we've talked there about infrastructure, we've talked about payments, we've talked about asset management as well. Is there a favourite piece of regulation you're paying attention to?
Well, I would say my favorite regulation is the next regulation, the one which is going to be put into implementation. And if I just take one example I have in mind, because that's what we're working on at the moment, we know that CSDR, the Central Securities Depositories Regulation, is going to impose fines on fair trade in certain circumstances. Yeah. Now, the question is, we don't know when and we don't know how much, but we know for sure this is coming. So the question for a number of participants is, how do we actually take advantage of this from, I would say, a settlements perspective to create new business opportunities, implementing, for instance, blockchain-based auto-borrow facilities that will allow to take over those trades when they are about to fail. Yeah. And I think this is a wonderful example of innovative financial companies who, instead of saying, oh my God, regulation's coming, it's going to continue dampen our margins, actually grasp the opportunities that regulation is opening to create new opportunities for revenues for themselves.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be paying attention to that for sure. And I hope the listeners are enjoying this conversation as much as I am. It's Streets Talks to Settle. I'm delighted to be joined by Philippe, Morel, CEO, and Marjan, Delatinne, who's head of payments. And if you're wondering how to find more episodes like this, streetsconsulting.com, #StreetsTalks2 is how you can find us. And I want to go into kind of some closing remarks, if I may. It's been a fantastic conversation. We've been talking for the highest level about some of the industry drivers, digital transformation, CBDC, central banks, thinking about the world of payments and digital identity. I'd really like to hear your thoughts about, as you look ahead, remainder of 2021 into 2022 and by all means even further and beyond if you can take that view, is what are you particularly paying attention to right now? So Marjan, let me come to you first of all.
Well, I think the rest of the time, and this again is not going only beyond 2021, but I think the work that we are doing currently is around making sure that whatever we are doing with our technology is addressing and solving a problem. And we continue that. And I think this is becoming more and more a momentum for us. If 2 years ago it was only talking about what is the problem and let's use this technology, I feel that we are reversing the situation as to what is the problem and we are solving it. And I think the tokenization is going to be a big, big change in the coming years and definitively in the agenda and roadmap of some large banks in 2021.
Fantastic. Well, we'll keep a keen eye on that for sure. And it's a similar question to you, Philippe. You know, you're thinking about the business and you're thinking about the roadmap ahead. What are you paying attention to?
Well, I'd say, well, first of all, let's hope that we'll have COVID behind us soon. And let's hope that we will have Brexit done as well, because these are two significant roadblocks on, I would say, the way forward for any economic actor. Now, assuming those boxes are ticked and we can move forward and go back to business, as Marjan was saying, the question for us is speed of innovation. And will we manage in 2022 and forward the same speed of acceleration or the same acceleration as the one internet managed back 15 or 20 years ago? And I think that we now see the regulators aligned or getting aligned. We see a number of important changes at our clients on the way they consider our technology. We see that we are bringing real innovative solutions. Now, will this suffice to change an industry which we know likes to procrastinate and take time to adopt to innovation? Yeah. As we are talking, not necessarily to the fintech, but to the big players, I would actually appeal to them and say, look at this technology. This is going to make a real change on the way that your back offices work. You've never managed for the last 30 years in making any changes in the way that your back office operates in a significant manner. Well, we are now bringing the tools to make those changes. Please seize them. And it doesn't matter if it's from SETL or from our competitors. I think globally, we have an aspiration to change this industry for the best.
Incredibly rallying call. It feels like now is the time. And it's been fantastic to have you both on the show. To the listeners, if you're wondering how to find out about SETL, the website is www.setl.io, and that's SETL, setl.io. You can find them on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And Marjan, Delatinne, it's been a joy to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. It was a great conversation.
It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And Philippe Morel, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Julia. Always a pleasure.
Wonderful. And to everybody, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation today. I've been Julia Streets, and thank you for listening to Streets Talks to Settle. Tune in again for future episodes.
This episode of Streets Talks 2 was produced by me, Kieran Yates, on behalf of Streets Consulting Limited. Streets Consulting is a business development, marketing, communications consultancy that's focused on helping fintechs from the smallest startup companies to some of the world's largest global organisations. Everybody's trying to innovate and everybody's trying to grow. You can find this episode on streetsconsulting.com and using the hashtag StreetsTalks2. We can be found on LinkedIn and on Twitter at StreetsConsult. Thanks for listening.